Hello everyone, I'm Andrew Daly. I'm a specialist recruiter in the world of digital procurement and supply chain, and I'd like to welcome you to this breakout session where we'll discuss the subject of filling the digital transformation skills gap. I'm joined by three very knowledgeable people on the subjects of this area. Firstly, we have Alejandro Bastachurea. He's the Head of Procurement Excellence at Zalando. Alejandro was the very first winner of the Amazon Business Procurement Hero Award last year for his role in their procurement digital transformation. We also have Freddie Biederman. He's the Global Purchasing Director for a number of categories at Danone, including CapEx and manufacturing. I know from our conversations, he's a very passionate advocate of the development of the procurement skill sets in the digital world. And last but by no means least, we have Jonathan Kingham from one of the event sponsors, GEP. Jonathan has 15 years experience in procurement advisory. Prior to that, he was in software engineering, so he brings a rather unique perspective. And he's currently leading the global procurement outsource for indirects of a company in the midst of its digital procurement journey. So welcome to all three panelists. Before we turn to them, I'd like to make you aware that we are running two polls during this session. The first one asks the question, at which stage is your company on its digital procurement journey? And the second one, on the issue of talent, asks the question, where do you see the main challenges in this area? So please contribute to those during the session. You can find those in the poll section. And also we have a Q&A section, which we'll try to answer any questions at the end of the session, assuming we've got time. So without further ado, I'd like to start by asking our panelists if they could tell us what their vision for the future role of the buyer is and what that will look like in the next 5 to 10 years. Alejandro, perhaps you can start.
Am I kicking, Andrew? Can Alejandro get in? Can you hear us?
Now I'm back. Yeah. Yes, can. Hi, thank you very much. So thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. From my side, I would say procurement sits on a goldmine of data. Probably there is no other function in an organization that has more access to information and data in any company, right? External data, internal data, contract data, transactional data, financial data. The technology landscape today is already ready to handle big data. And also you heard yesterday from McKinsey about new roles popping up like data translator, data scientists, and so on. And therefore, procurement has an opportunity. And all buyers have now the possibility to really translate data into intelligence information. And this is, for me, one of the key roles that a buyer of the future will play. Back to you, Andrew.
Freddie, would you agree?
Absolutely agree. We're seeing a very big shift within our profession, thanks to data and enrichment and analytic for insight and foresight. That's going to completely change the landscape of the skill that we need to put in place into a procurement organization, but how it's going to morph into a business insight rather than just squeezing pricing and developing new supply base.
Okay. And Jonathan, you have a slightly different perspective as a consultant. What do you see in your role?
I was thinking about, and we did talk beforehand, obviously, with this group, and I have a different perspective, but less so as a challenge back to the guys, because I would wholeheartedly agree. I guess the different perspective I'd bring into this conversation is less sort of from a 5-10 year perspective, but where do I see the sort of skills today, and how does that sort of lead towards what that might look like in the future? And one of the sort of, let's say, in maturing as opposed to best-in-class organizations, the challenge I see is there's this promise of technology, whether best in breed or otherwise, and the promise of data. And what I see is organizations that put in the infrastructure and have the data, to your point, Alejandro, have the systems in place, but actually struggle. They struggle on two sides. One is on the back end side of things, on the P2O, P2P side of things, invoice payments, processing, etc. They don't get the adoption to the tools. And I see where, from a skills perspective, apps which I know some organizations are filling, but other organizations still struggle with it, is the old organizational structure of having PTO teams, contracting teams, etc., lack the skill sets in things like content management, catalog enablement, market enablement, digital adoption management, and actually more skills that are keen on the back end side of things to what we almost see in an e-commerce type of organizations. We talk about human centricity and otherwise, but it's actually for that next level of organization down that are just starting their journey in the middle of it, and how they use all this technology. I think that's the struggle they have, is sometimes they try to do, they put the technology in and try to keep the same team in place to do that, and actually that team can't do it. You can't just keep bolting these requirements on top. So you need to think about how you change that, that middle office capability to support the transformation. And as organizations try to get towards the sort of the future that Freddie and I'm trying to talk to, likewise on the front end, how do you really enable the people, the practitioners today, the buyers of today, with those tools and skills? Because the reality is they may not have used them in the past. And I think there's two interesting conversation pieces: the what and the how on this.
Alejandro, Freddie, you're both nodding. Any thoughts on Jonathan's comments?
Can't emphasize more. First is leadership of the company has to believe into digitalization and its power, and I have to push it toward the organization, because that's a massive change management that need to happen at the top first. And indeed, it comes throughout an organization. That will see a change of skill and a deeper specialization into, as Jonathan mentioned, front, middle, and back office. Those will become three very different jobs and sense and skill set that the companies has to anticipate and build on. Otherwise, those skills will be extremely rare and extremely expensive.
Alejandro, any further comments on that subject before we move on?
Absolutely, and I'm with Freddie, right? And also Jonathan mentioned, also every company has its own journey, right? It depends where you are in your digitalization journey, it depends where you are in your maturity level. But the point is to put it at the front of the agenda, right? To start driving it. It's also a leadership topic, but we will probably talk more in details about that in a few minutes.
I'm sure we will. Now, the second question I have for you, gents, is around the very important issue of talent. And I'd like to share some of your experiences, the vital issues in that area around the identification, development, and retention of relevant talent. Perhaps you could start us off, Freddie.
Yes, for us, it starts very much in three categories: identify, develop, and retain. These are three main areas where it's deeply embedded into how we look at people and how we are able to first grab the interest, because it starts by identifying the people that need to be developed. You cannot force that. You need to have some kind of accoutrements to data or willingness to learn. Then developing, and there is a whole new world out there, either self-taught learning on the web. There is massive content already out there, and engaging with also training professionals to develop the right pipeline of training in order to support the progression of the skill ramp up. And retain, because once the people have been identified, developed, and becoming the true link between data and business, then their price tag is going to the roof, and those are the high candy that everybody will fight on the market. So retain is as important as identify and as develop.
For sure. Jonathan, on that same subject?
Yeah, I fully agree as well. But when I thought about this question, I was actually thinking quite selfishly of myself. I think from a development perspective and identification perspective, and repeating maybe a little bit on Freddie's comments, we need to define what the roles look like to people, and there's a little bit of hand-holding that's needed in here. But I also think we need to show them, and I actually think that's part of the challenge sometimes that the buyers and category managers and procurement folk today struggle with. They know when they dial into these sort of calls, and we talk about analytics and the importance of that, but then they struggle to really visualize and understand, well, how does this work and how do I make it work? And I think to your point, Freddie, about online learning and developing ourselves is absolutely an onus on people to just go off and start learning. And we can talk a little bit about, if you think about the profile of the type of person you want for the future, you want people more proactive. You want people who are sort of using data to identify opportunities. You want people who are problem solvers. Part and parcel of that is to go out and develop yourselves. But we also need to recognize, and I see this is objective, that I think we need to try and show people, this is what good looks like. Here's what we're talking about. Here's what you can do if you use this technology. Freddie, Alejandro, no doubt in your organization, some great examples, but there's a lot of other procurement practitioners out there who know that data is disrupting and digitization is disrupting their roles in procurement as a whole. But how do they make that transition? So yeah, absolutely, leadership, onus there, defining the roles, driving career paths, supporting them, but also I think showing them what it looks like. They're not just talking about it.
And Alejandro, in your transformation, your award-winning transformation, I should say, what perspectives can you offer?
I would like to build on what Jonathan said, because he made a very good point on we need to really clear what the capabilities would look like, right? There are two things that what we've done. One is getting closer to universities, right? There is an untapped potential in universities, people that are not aware about procurement, but actually they have the skill set and the mindset. So we need to bring procurement closer also to those people to make it more attractive for them to join our organizations. This is on the one side, showing how the skills looks like, and that anybody or almost anybody from different type of degrees can join procurement as an organization. We have in our teams people that are lawyers, engineers, marketeers, so they're very diverse and wide range of skills and people in this organization. This is on the one side. On the second side, the war for talent is now everywhere. It's not only on a company basis, but it's also on a functional basis. So procurement needs to make itself attractive to really hire the talent, especially in new roles. When you're trying to hire a data scientist, you're not competing with other procurement organizations. You're procurement with other functions within your own company. And therefore, you need to make your function also attractive to bring those people on board to our functions to help us get where we want to get. And this is what I would see, let's say, within identify, develop, and retain.
Alejandro, as a recruiter, I could not agree more with your comments there about the war for talent. It's something which we see every day, and it's a fascinating subject, which perhaps we could talk about another time. But moving on, you touched on it already, Alejandro, yourself, the role of leadership in all this. How do you see it, Jonathan? Jonathan, you're on mute.
There you are. Sorry about that. I mean, I don't have much more to add on it. I think maybe just, again, sort of stating the obvious, but leadership is not just about saying and policy and defining roles and putting training in place. Some things I find quite interesting, again, maybe talking to a certain types of organizations and maybe the ones that don't fully buy into the vision for digitization and maybe that full vision for procurement as a value creator, is that there's a lot of talk about digitization and there's a lot of look at the numbers, like how many robots have we implemented and things like this, metrics that don't really measure the value, but actually the idea and the buy-in for what the future could look like. People deliver that digital transformation and build the skills to support it. It's not there because fundamentally the sort of the metrics for performance, which are cost, risk, continuity of supply, end up breaking it, and it ends up back in firefighting mode. And it's actually being able to break that down and be able to say, look, there's somewhere leadership saying there's somewhere we want to get to in the future. We recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty to get there, but we're going to support you and do it. And I think that's sometimes where the difference between saying a good story and putting some things in place to support things versus actually enabling the organization, people within the procurement organization to go off and deliver on it. I don't know if that makes sense to me, but I do see that day that talk digitization and talk about supporting skills versus the actual doing and enabling people to happen is a big gap. And it's that leadership that we need, not just this sort of slideware and messaging that says we want people to be more digital, because I see that failing quite a bit.
Alejandro, how have you addressed that in Zalando?
Yes, I think leadership is also about walking the talk, right? So procurement also needs to show by itself that it's capable of digitalizing itself, of offering customer-centric solution to internal stakeholders and so on. But I think what I would recommend is our opportunity in the future is to position procurement as the company's central hub for insight and foresight, was mentioned by Freddie at the beginning. Anybody in the business who is building a business case to open a new factory or thinking about expanding into new market, they should come to procurement. We do have the data, we do have the information, we can advise the business. We are more than just people negotiating contracts. So I think this could be a role that leadership could play in positioning the function more forward thinking. The second is, if we are the spider in the web, if we are the network integrator, we need to play that role. We need to be able to translate that data and information and make an intelligent proposal, advice to the business, right? And it was also mentioned today in one of the sessions, sustainability and SEG is represented in the supply chain, up to 80%, if I remember the number well. That means that you cannot achieve it without information and data, which means procurement can drive it. So I think this is these are 2 or 3 arguments that a leader can put in place to put procurement at the front of the company and get away of being just the negotiator and the transactional function.
And Freddie, your thoughts on this subject of leadership?
Yeah, I think it has been always the start of a journey of digitalization. As a leader, you always measure risk versus reward, and starting the digitalization journey is a risk for leadership as well. It requires investment, it requires people, it requires capex and investment, and along the way, you will fail more at the beginning more that you're going to succeed. And then once you crack a nut, then you move to the next one and the next one. But fundamentally, the ones that are early starter will drive a competitive advantage for the companies throughout procurement in delivering super result, but also attracting talents. When we will be democratized area in procurement, when digital is part of the overall landscape, who will want to work as a new buyer for a company that might still function on Excel for reporting and fighting to send a purchasing order to our obsolete system. So it's all start there.
Okay, thank you. So just a note to the audience, we're getting some interesting questions through, so thank you for those. We'll address those in a few minutes. On the polls, we're also getting some interesting data through there. If you haven't already contributed to those polls, please do, so we can get as much accurate information as possible on those 2 questions, and then we can talk about those shortly as well. And then just one other subject that we really covered a lot and talked about a lot, and it's been a big feature, of course, of the event so far, but we covered it a lot in our preparation for this session, and that's the big word, or the big issue of data. And it's integral part in procurement now. Alejandro, I know you've got some strong thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, of course, data is not everything. You need to be able to understand data, to convert data into intelligence, right? So it also has to serve the purpose. And what is important is that for buyers to be able to work on the data. Of course, you can apply and recruit people that are data scientists, data translators. This will be needed. It's already needed today, but the buyer should be also in a position for them to self-serve their needs, right? And there where digital tools can help. I think as I said at the beginning, the technology landscape is there. We are ready to take advantage of those tools. We don't have to wait anymore. And from the one side, you need the new roles, the new capabilities mentioned by Jonathan, what is coming in the future. On the other side, we need to upskill the buyers to be able to get them the job done up to a certain point, right? And this is what I would look at as an important piece of bringing the data with the people. Indeed.
And Freddie, similar experiences?
Yeah, definitely. Same than Alejandro. I think he nailed the topic, Alejandro.
Good. So to our poll then, I've got some wonderful news. We asked the question, at which stage your company's on a digital procurement journey? And the first option was not started, and we have 0% votes for that. So well done everyone for starting. That's wonderful news. Only 10% are planning on it, The dominant answer with 50% was deploying it. And we've got some early adopters who have nearly 30% who are actually thinking of the next step. So what do we make of that, Jen? So is that pleasing results? Jonathan, any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's probably not surprising. I suspect the digital journey doesn't end anyway, so everyone's deploying it the whole time. But it's good to hear that we're at least all on the journey at some point in it. Indeed.
And then on our second question, where do you see the main challenges into the following areas? We've got a clear winner here. So we had identify the future digital talents. We had developing the skills of the future, and that's currently running at 75%. The first one was only 8%. So the development of the skills is clearly on the agenda, which again is great news. And retaining talents and knowledge is at 16.7%. So obviously a very important issue, but perhaps secondary currently to developing the skills of the future. And I think we'd probably all agree that if you look across the entire landscape, that's not a surprising result.
No, no, I think it's the key challenge, and it's maybe coming to a question from Carsten that I see, and measure and evaluate digital skill and capability. AI is a big word, right? It's a multiplier and a plethora of technology that may artificial intelligence. So far, I haven't seen any tool that is able to have a human speak to a machine and assess its digital capability. So it's very much about building together with experts. I would encourage to go out for some consultant. There are some very high skilled people that can define the journey, but also the assessment, depending on the level on the organization that you are recruiting, obviously. And work with the HR to make a talent piping. Assess the competency, find the gap, and develop the journey of learning. We are at the stage when we're going to start boot camps, which is one of the best to our view, to solidify a team, but also learn as a herd, and being able to quickly raise the awareness and the skill that are needed. Last mention is, no, the buyer will not be needed to know how to type on algorithm or Python 2.0 or Jupyter suite are not the skill that the buyer will have to develop in the future. The data translation will become key. Understand the technology that making this famous AI or machine learning or natural language processing or whatsoever, and keep retaining the knowledge on the business. Find the problem within the business and potentially associate it with a technology that can solve it, and hand it over to the data professional that we will be able to work back and forth with you. A buyer will be the intermediate between the business and the data work, to my view. And those are the critical skills that need to happen. Understand the technology. And for that, there is a lot out there.
Yeah, yeah. Those boot camps are like a great initiative, Freddie. And we've got an anonymous question here, and I think I'll put this one to Alejandro. How does someone get started to gain the capabilities? Self-learning we've talked about, mentoring I'm sure we've touched on. How can companies support employees as well? Some thoughts, Freddie's just touched on it. Alejandro, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have one example. So in our case, when we were deploying some of the analytics tool, we noticed that some of the people who were doing procurement activities were quite keen in analytics. So there are people that by nature are already very interested in these kind of things, but maybe they didn't know it, right? So on the one side is, and this is something what Freddie just recently touched, right? So you have this combination of buyer and data scientist roles, right? Working together, and you will see that in that interaction, some people that were doing procurement are quite interested in more the data side. So you can develop them actually quite fast, right? By this, you can do self-learnings, boot camps, mentorings. There are a lot of options, e-learnings, trainings, and so on. So, but I think the purpose is to identify the skill in the person, right? So there are some buyers that can convert into data scientists and data analytics people. They will just need some support to get there. On the other hand, I can give another example from the other way. There were people that were very much into data science, but they have some commercial acumen. And these people can become very good data translators. They might never be a buyer, but they can become the ambassadors between really the algorithm, the developer, and the procurement piece, right? So I think it starts by understanding the skill set in your team. There are a lot of potential probably already there. And then how to get there, there are many options. I'm more a friend of learning by doing, making mistakes, testing, and learning from that and move on, right? And then you become faster in also getting to know the data and learning from the mistakes.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you. So unfortunately, we're rapidly running out of time for this session. So just before we go into some final comments from our panelists, I'd like to thank all the guests for taking the time to watch this. I hope you found it informative and useful, and please reach out with any further comments to the panelists. Just time for some final thoughts. Jonathan, would you like to just give a quick summary for what you think on the subject?
3 things. One on Alejandro's point. Absolutely, you see people that have the skills. I think development with talent retention will become an issue, because the reality is then how do you hang on to those people? I see that myself. So I think it's a very key point. The data translator one, I love that. And for me, the way it is being able to speak the language that you can speak to people on the data science, the AI guys, and translate that. For me, that's absolutely a critical skill, and I fully agree with that. I think that's being able to have that conversation and know when to dictate what they should do, and knowing how to talk to data people is in itself, it's not just as straightforward as just saying, I have this requirement, can you do it? There's more to it than that, and more nuance in it. I do, and final point, and again, it's a repetition, but I do think it's a very key one, and one I sort of take away from even myself is the onus is also on the individual, because it is the role, if it really wants to be that exciting role, and I am repeating what I said earlier on, and you really want to as being the orchestrator, you need a mindset that's more proactive, and that means don't sit on your hands and wait around for someone to tell you what to do. They're my 3 tips.
Thank you, Jonathan. Freddie, your final thoughts?
Yeah, one thing that as a skill I think will be paramount for any buyer going forward, the data will be catered. You'll be incentivized into the data, its accuracy, its insight and foresight. Data storytelling is the key that will make a difference, because you're going to be flooded by data, and if there is one that needs to be taught, promote, and sustain, is data storytelling. That will make the whole difference with a buyer that is successful to launch a project and deliver it upon expectation, versus the one that's just going to dig into data and going to get lost out of it.
And Alejandro, anything to add to that, or perhaps, your final thoughts?
So maybe key takeaway would be, as I said before, right? Position procurement organization as a central hub of data and information. For that, you will need talent, you will need the right people, the right skills, probably new roles. But I fully agree with Freddie. At the end of the day, is how you storytell the outcome of collecting all of this information. That makes a big difference. And I think this is the next step for procurement if we want to continue to be a strategic function within a company.
Thank you. So I think we'll probably start to lose some of our viewers shortly as they go to different sessions, but I know the camera will be running for a few more minutes for those that want to hear more from our panelists. So we've got a couple more questions we might just touch on until we run out of time completely. So Mirth Wallinger asks, talking about front, middle and back office structuring, where do you see the biggest opportunities for the digital skills? Jonathan, I know you've got some thoughts on sort of the front, middle and back office. What do you think on that? Where's the greatest opportunity?
It's a loaded question. There's different roles, I think, in the middle office, not different skills. I think the roles are on the front office and buyer side. We talk about different skills. I think we've covered it already. Just it's a recognition that the buyer of the future is not going to be able to do everything, and don't make them a data scientist. Yeah. Expect them to be content managers. Don't expect them to be catalog managers. Don't expect them to be digital process engineers. Obvious stuff like that. Put that capability in place and teach them how to use it to drive the value for the business, and sort of deliver on that vision that Alejandro set out earlier.
And we have a question from Vladimir. So Freddie or Alejandro, perhaps you can cover this one. So Vladimir asks, from your experience, what digital tools should be mandatory for every buyer? They should be using every week, perhaps Excel, Power BI, RPA, forecast tools. I know we touched on this at the start, but he uses the word mandatory. Any thoughts? Start
with a very strong spend analytics. harvest your data and start to know exactly what you buy, where you buy it, how much to buy it. There is a gold mine to dig already on this data set. So that will be my first insight. Start by there because the payback can be quite quick.
Yeah, indeed. One of the questions is how closely do you see data scientists and procurement professionals working together in the future? I think we all see a strong link there, don't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, yes, thank you everyone once again for your contributions. Thank you to our audience, which is now starting to dwindle as they'll head off to sessions, which I'm sure will be almost as good as this one. So, anyone, anything else to add in the last couple of minutes at all? Yeah, the numbers are dropping off now as everyone heads off. So thank you all. Bye to everyone. And yeah, thank you, Freddie.
Thank you, everyone.
Alejandro. Really enjoyed your company. It's been a great discussion.